Story 1. A couple of years ago, I woke up at 3 a.m. and saw someone walk past my bedroom door. I called out in a just woken, not thinking haze, thinking maybe my boyfriend had come over while I was sleeping, but I got no response, so I knew it was not him. I got out of bed, forgetting to take my phone or any defensive item, and went into the front room where the light was on. I was met by a man staring at one of the walls. I asked who he was and got no answer. By then I was awake enough to realize I could be in serious trouble. So I ran back to the bedroom, grabbed my phone, and called the police. They arrived within a few minutes. It turned out the man was mentally ill, and to this day neither I nor the police know how he got in. Story 2. I moved into our house a month before my husband. I was painting our guest room with the windows wide open. I was busy painting and listening to music when I realized it had gotten dark outside. I heard leaves crunching outside but did not think anything of it because we have many neighbors who walk their dogs. When I went to close the windows, I saw a man standing in my backyard under a tree, maybe 5 feet from our back door, staring up at me. I fell to the floor and realized the glass back door was probably open and only the screen was in place, which meant he could have easily walked into my house. I crawled to my phone and called my husband, who then called 911 while rushing home. We have a 6-foot fence around our yard. This person had hopped it to watch me. I could not sleep at night for months. Story 3. One day, while I was working afternoon shifts a couple of years ago, I woke up at around 10 a.m. and started watching American Dad before getting up. I heard my back door open. That was normal in our house because we only used the back door, but no one was supposed to be home yet. I assumed it was my mom and didn't think anything of it. Then I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor. I called out to my mom and got no response. My door cracked open and a head popped in. It was a man in his 30s with a blonde beard and a big mane of greasy hair who looked shocked to see me. At the time I was about 260 pounds, 6 feet 3 inches, 20 years old, and male. I was sitting in only my boxers. Before I realized what was happening, he asked, "Is this the redacted residence?" I replied, "No." He made a swift exit, and by the time I collected my thoughts, he was already gone from the driveway. A family friend who was a veteran police officer later said a man had been pulling this kind of stunt to rob people in nearby towns. Story 4. I was babysitting a child who had a video monitor. The parents told me she would not wake up while they were out and to call them immediately if she did. I was watching television with the monitor set to the side so I could keep an eye on her. Around 11 o'clock, the camera's view shifted a few inches and then began to slightly jiggle, as if someone were moving it. I squinted, trying to decide what I was seeing. The whole screen burst to static for a few seconds, and the child started wailing. She stood up and screamed in her crib, like one of the children in The Sims. When she did not fall back asleep after a few minutes, I called the mother. She said, "Okay, we're on our way home anyway. We think she has nightmares sometimes. It's fine. Never again." Story 5. Someone was attempting to break in. I have a 75-pound boxer and have never seen anyone run as fast as that man did. Story 6. I was about 21 or 22 and living by myself. I left my window open on a pleasant night. It was low to the ground, so someone could get in if they really tried, but the screen was not easy to remove and I lived in a fairly safe neighborhood, so I did not think twice about it. I woke up in the middle of the night because I smelled smoke. I reached out to turn on my lamp and my hand hit what was clearly a person. My brain fully woke up at that point and I realized there was a shirtless man in my bedroom, smoking a cigarette and staring at me. I remember yelling at him to get out, and I must have spooked him as badly as he spooked me because he leapt out of my window and ran away. I slammed the window shut and moved a bookcase in front of it. The next morning I found the screen leaning against the house. I did not sleep the rest of the night, and I have not slept with a window more than cracked since then. I now refuse to live on the ground floor. I do not know if he planned to rob me or sexually assault me or both. It was terrifying, and it makes me wonder how many times something like that has happened and I did not wake up. Story 7. I was home from university for the summer and did not have a job. so I was alone while everyone else was at work. I live in a small village on a quiet street, so it was normal to have all the windows and doors open during the day. Late in the afternoon, I got a call from my father. He said he was around the corner but struggling to get into the street, and told me to lock all the doors, close the windows, and go upstairs. His tone made me do it without hesitation. I closed and locked everything and went upstairs. A few minutes later, he called again and said some police officers would be going through the side gate into the back garden to check the shed, and that he would be home soon. I stayed upstairs and saw armed police checking the back garden. When my father finally got home, I asked what had happened. It turned out a 16-year-old on our street had taken some legal highs, stabbed a neighbor, and then ran away. They found him at night because he was scared of the dark and came out of hiding. Story 8. When I was 19 and living in my first apartment, someone knocked at the door. I looked through the peephole and saw a burly, heavy-set man who abruptly started screaming for me to let him in. He shouted that he was going to beat me up and kick the door down if I did not open it. I called the police, and as soon as I was on the phone with them, he began body slamming my door to break it down. I was terrified and crying as 5 police officers arrived within 5 minutes. When he heard the sirens, he walked away, and the officers met him at the bottom of the stairs. Apparently, he had been looking for the previous renter and was extremely intoxicated. They arrested him, and thankfully he never came back. I ended up breaking my lease and moving out 3 months later. It was a very nice neighborhood, but the incident made me wish I were back home with my family instead of being on the other side of the United States. Story 9. This happened to me a couple of years ago. I've lived on my own a long time, so I don't get scared easily. I had just finished reading in bed. I turned my lamp off, settled down to sleep, and hugged my cat close to me. It was about 1:30 in the morning. I closed my eyes and heard a voice say meow, as if imitating a cat. My window was open, so I thought it was someone being weird outside. I opened my eyes, and in the middle of my bedroom was a small boy wearing a red jumper, waving his arm above his head. I leapt up like a ninja, turned the light on, and my heart was racing. Nothing paranormal had ever happened in this house during the time I had lived here. I spent the whole night totally freaked out, only getting a bit of sleep when it started to get light outside. My friends thought it was hilarious when I told them. I insisted there was no way I was living in a haunted house and started Googling cleansing, exorcists, and whatnot. Over the next few nights, other strange things started happening. I began sleeping with the television on, and as soon as I tried to sleep, I would hear voices coming from it or notice shadows by the side of my bed. It was dreadful. I actually resorted to saying out loud, "I'm really tired, so if you could not haunt me for one night, I would be very grateful." I had never really believed in this sort of thing before, so it felt like an entire paradigm shift. One of my friends at work asked if I was on drugs. Funnily enough, I had just started taking a new tablet, Montelukast, for my asthma. When I got home, I read the side effects and found that hallucinations are a rare side effect. I stopped taking it and the hauntings stopped. Summary: the medication made me see ghosts. Thanks to everyone for the replies. I woke up to so many notifications on my phone. I did some research and discovered Montelukast is prescribed mainly to children and to people who have trouble using an inhaler, at least here in the United Kingdom. My asthma was going through a bad patch, so they tried a few different medications on me. I remember thinking that if you were a small child and started seeing things every night with no idea the tablets were causing it, the thought is frightening. Nothing has happened in my house since then. Everything is completely normal, and I can now sleep with the lights off like a proper adult. Story 10. I have been pretty fortunate based on these comments, but I was home alone one night while my wife and son were visiting my mother-in-law. I walked back to our bedroom and saw someone rummaging through my son's room on the video baby monitor. I immediately grabbed my firearm and yelled to the other side of the house that I was armed and to come out slowly as I made my way toward his room. I got there, flipped on the light, and found nothing. I searched the whole house, pumped full of adrenaline. Finally satisfied I was alone, I went back to my room and the person was back in the room. I took a closer look and I am ashamed to say I was looking at myself. The camera is a live feed on our wireless network and it was streaming on a huge delay. I have never known it to do that, and it has not done it since. In short, I went looking for myself and came back empty-handed. Story 11. My boyfriend worked away from home a lot, and I always struggled to sleep on the first night he was away. On this occasion, I was woken by the sound of a man shouting and then someone banging on wood or a front door. I jumped up and looked out my bedroom window just in time to see a man dressed all in black walking through our garden toward the house. I ran to the front window to make sure he kept going. He did, but he met up with another man dressed in black walking toward my house. I was terrified and called the police. They arrived within minutes and checked the back garden, but the men were gone. It turned out a neighbor had caught them both trying to steal his car. One escaped through the gardens. The other ran through the roads. They met up outside my house. I did not sleep at all that night, and my brother came to stay the next night. I am so glad I live in an apartment now. It feels much more secure. Story 12. The housekeeper attempted suicide in our bathroom. She died by suicide 4 days later. Story 13. When I was about 14, I was home alone one night around 10 in the evening, standing in my kitchen making cereal. It was dark outside, and then suddenly there was the loudest sound. A woman who appeared intoxicated threw a hammer through my kitchen window. It was very loud, and glass was everywhere. I followed her down the street while calling the police. It was strange. Note for everyone asking why I followed. I followed because the smashed window was wide open and I could see clearly through it. She appeared very fragile and disoriented, possibly under the influence. She could barely walk or see straight and began stumbling away, mumbling incoherently after breaking the window. I also did not know how I would explain the situation to my parents without a solid answer. Following her was a distressed action driven by adrenaline. Story 14. I work from home, so I am home alone a lot. One day I was working and, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement in my backyard. A man jumped over my fence into the yard. Panicked, I called my then boyfriend, now fiancé, and told him what was happening. While I was on the phone, someone knocked at the front door. A woman from CenturyLink said technicians would need access to the backyard. I told her someone had just jumped the fence, so I thought they were already there. Way to give me a heart attack, CenturyLink. Story 15. When I was young, I came home from a party in the middle of the night while my dad was out of town. I started making a midnight quesadilla when I heard someone cough in the basement. I yelled and ran outside, and they ran through the backyard. As it turned out, my dad's ex-girlfriend's daughter had stolen the ex-girlfriend's key to our house and came to rob us. She was caught a couple of years later doing the same to her sister-in-law. Story 16. I lit 2 long taper candles for ambience while I was playing guitar late at night. I was facing the window and, shortly after, turned back toward the candles and discovered one of them was completely gone. The stand remained, but there was no melted wax, just a bare holder. The other candle was still lit and no shorter than when I had lit it. It was almost 3 in the morning, and I was so terrified that I got in my car and drove to my father's house. Story 17. Somebody tried to break into the house while I was alone. The house was quiet and dark at night. I walked past the front door to go upstairs for bed when the handle suddenly started jerking, as if the Hulk were trying to get in. Then whoever it was began kicking or shouldering the door, making the whole frame jiggle. I froze, my mind went blank, and I just stood there staring. My dog bolted down the stairs like it was her time to shine, scrambled on the tile, and let loose the most vicious barks I have ever heard. Whoever it was left. She was a very good girl. I miss her. Story 18. You know those kitchen tongs with a spring and a latch to keep them closed? I had a pair and set the latch, then put them on the counter. I stepped away for a bit and came back, and they jumped off the counter at me. It was the biggest jump scare of my life. The latch had come undone and they sprang open. In that millisecond when an inanimate object seems to come to life and leap at you, you do not realize what is happening and you completely freak out. Story 19. I was living alone after my ex-husband moved out, and the man across the street, who was about 20 years older and used drugs, kept trying to date me. He would harass me when I left the house or arrived home and threatened to rape me. I had just started dating my current boyfriend. He helped hang motion-detecting lights outside. I began carrying pepper spray and keeping the alarm on whenever I was home. We also agreed that if I did not text him within a set period and he could not reach me, he would go to my house and check on me. I also added him to my work calendar just in case. It got so scary that my boyfriend moved in much sooner than we had planned because I felt unsafe. After the man watched him move in and saw him working on project cars in the driveway, he stopped harassing me and moved away a few months later. I had never felt so unsafe in my own home, constantly wondering whether the outside lights were on because of the neighbor's cat or because the man was trying to break in. Story 20. One afternoon someone knocked at my back door. I thought it was the man who came to read our meter, so I opened the door. Two large men pushed into the house. One of them threw me against the wall and then they shoved me down on the couch. They said they were members of the Hells Angels and were angry because my boyfriend was selling drugs and cutting into their profits. They kept calling me by my next-door neighbor's name. We had suspected they were selling drugs. All the people stopping by for less than 5 minutes had made it obvious. I kept telling them I was not her. One of them searched the house while the other kept me pinned to the couch. They began to realize they were in the wrong house because they could not find anything where they were told it would be. My neighbor's house is a single floor with a basement. My house is a 4-level backsplit. I showed them my mail, which had my name, and they knew they had made a mistake. They said they were after my neighbor's boyfriend because he had raped their cousin, which I knew was not true, but I did not care. I just wanted them to leave. They robbed me of my cash and left. I now have locks on my screen doors. Story 21. Not exactly alone. I was home with my newborn son when someone knocked on the front door. I was expecting my mother, but she usually comes in through the garage. I thought it was strange, but I yelled, "Come in," because why would I not? Then a disheveled older woman stumbled through the door and asked me for a ride to the nearest gas station. I told her I did not have a car seat for my son, so I could not go anywhere. She started screaming, "That is just inappropriate," and did not stop even when I told her she needed to leave or I would call the police. After a minute or so, my mother pulled into the driveway. The woman saw the car, ran back out the door, and I never saw her again. That night my truck was broken into. I cannot say for sure it was the same woman, but I gave her description to the police. Story 22. I was asleep at home alone. When I turned over in bed, I opened my eyes a little while turning, and they closed again just as quickly. In that split second, I could have sworn I saw a man standing at the foot of my bed. I lay still, awake with my eyes closed, trying not to show I was awake and listening for any sound of someone breathing or moving. I could not hear anything. I was too scared to open my eyes. I consoled myself that there was no way someone could have entered without my hearing a window break, and I fell back asleep. When I got up in the morning, the front door was open. They had not taken anything and left no signs of being there. It was still very creepy. Note: typo correction. I meant the man was standing. Story 23. I was home with my infant twin daughters, who were sound asleep. I was watching television in the lower level of my home with 3 levels. The windows on that level look out to the backyard. As I got up to go to the kitchen, something caught my attention. A pale left arm appeared to be subtly illuminated outside in the far right window, about 6 inches from the glass. It was angled straight down as if steadying itself. My heart sank. I could feel my heartbeat in my neck. I ran up the few stairs to the main floor, grabbed my phone, and returned to see if it was still there. It was gone. I had never been so shaken. I called the non-emergency police line. When they arrived, I walked into the backyard with the officers, but we did not find anything. They were great and reassured me that calling was the right thing to do and that they were there to help. I do not know what it was, but the image is seared into my memory. Story 24. I had the police knock on my door one day while I was alone. An officer had a man in the back of his car who said we were holding his friend captive. I showed the officer my identification and explained that it was just me, and that my husband was not home. I told him they could check the house if they wanted, but he said that was not necessary. He then asked questions about my neighbors. Story 25. A few years ago, I was home alone during a thunderstorm. I went into the bathroom to take a dump. At the exact moment I sneezed while on the toilet, the power went out. The house was pitch black, and I literally thought I had blinded myself. I could not see my hands. In a panic, I shouted, "No, this cannot be true," while feeling for toilet paper to wipe and flush. After finishing, I sat on the toilet trying to figure out how to tell everyone I know that I had literally blinded myself by sneezing while on the toilet. After about 2 minutes of complete darkness and dread, lightning struck outside and lit up the hallway. Best feeling ever. Edit. Thank you to everyone for the awards and comments. I told this story to a few friends about 3 years ago. They laughed hard and still joke with me about it. When the question about scary experiences came up here, most people said it had never crossed their minds, but for me the idea of blinding myself while pooping did. Once again, thank you all. Story 26. A few years ago, I was home alone in my basement playing video games when I heard the door that connects my kitchen to the garage creak open and slam shut. But I never heard the mechanical garage door operate. Then I heard heavy footsteps of someone wearing boots walking the length of my kitchen directly above me. I originally thought my brother must have forgotten something. He had left about 5 minutes earlier for work, so I was about to call up to him to make fun of him. But something in the back of my mind told me that something was not right. I muted my television to hear better and stay quiet. I heard the footsteps turn and walk back to the door, and again the door creaked open and slammed shut. Yet I still did not hear the mechanical garage door open or close. I slowly walked upstairs, opened the door to my garage, and saw that the garage door had been closed the entire time. The only explanations I could think of were that something paranormal had happened, or someone had broken in, walked through my kitchen, and left without taking anything and without me hearing the garage door operate. Both are equally terrifying. Story 27. I hate when there is a random noise in the house, like a door slamming shut. The unsettling feeling of not being alone after you have already checked that everyone is gone is awful. Story 28. My roommates were out of town, and my dog started growling in the middle of the night at something at the end of a dark hallway. She had never behaved like that, so I was genuinely freaked out. Then I heard noises coming from the kitchen on the other side of the house. I was convinced someone was in there, so, like a character in a movie, I grabbed a flashlight and a weapon and went to investigate. As soon as the flashlight hit the kitchen area, something panicked and knocked a bunch of things over. I was terrified, and then my flashlight illuminated the culprit. A huge raccoon had snuck through the dog door and was eating my dog's food in the kitchen. We made eye contact, and it immediately fled outside. Story 29. I forgot about this one before I posted another. This is the day a naked teenager asked for help. I was loading laundry while my baby napped in the apartment just a door down. The teenager was being followed by an extremely tall, muscular man who had undressed him and kept trying to get him to lower his voice and go inside his apartment. I did not have a phone with me, and it was frightening while I looked for one. Thank you to the Bedford, Texas Police Department. They had 2 police cars blocking the parking lot exits before I finished my call with the police. It was less than 2 minutes from when I started dialing to when officers separated the victim from the attacker. Their response time was excellent. The child was very brave. The man kept saying things like, "You know how much this is going to hurt your mom if you tell. She is going to be heartbroken if you ruin this for her." The boy shook and shouted back, "Well, isn't that your fault? If you cared at all, you never would have touched me. My mom loves me. She will only ask why I did not tell her sooner." I did not know him at all, but I was so proud of him. Head bowed and embarrassed to be naked in public. He remained strong and refused to feel ashamed of what someone else had done to him. Story 30. I have a 5-channel sound system. Nothing too fancy, but the best I had ever had. I watched an action film and heard a creaking door to my left in the distance. I had to clear my home because I thought there was an intruder. It turned out to be just the improved surround sound. Edit. It is a 5.1 system. The 2 rear speakers caused the problem. They are oriented toward the outside of my house. Sorry for any confusion caused by my poor terminology. Story 31. The front door of my apartment complex is broken, so anyone can walk in. People keep trying to open it or look through the windows. Creeps me out. The landlord will probably fix it this week, and I cannot wait. Story 32. When I was a kid and home alone, I usually moved around a lot while I slept. One night I woke up and had not moved. I thought it would be easy to make my bed. I grabbed the bedding, moved it back a little, then tossed it into place. Something black was sticking out, so I tossed the bedding back further. There was a large black wasp in my bed, an inch from where I had been sleeping, buzzing loudly and clearly agitated. I put the bedding back down and tried to crush it until the buzzing stopped. I grew up on a farm, so bugs usually did not bother me, but I checked my bed for weeks after that. Story 33. November 13th, 1981. I was 15 at the time, female. I was at home with the cat. My parents were out with friends when the house shook and the lights and electricity went out. They came home a couple of hours later to find me under the dining room table with the cat and all the lights still out. Father. Why are you sitting in the dark? Me. The house shook and the lights went out. Father. Oh, there was a bomb in Wimbledon 6 miles away, carried out by the Irish Republican Army. Me. Didn't you think to check I was okay? Father, well, we weren't hurt, so you should have been okay. I was terrified. I had been involved in bomb scares before, but had never experienced one going off. If the house shook from a bomb 6 miles away, it was big. I have only experienced something like that one other time, when the Buncefield oil storage exploded in 2005. That was probably a worse explosion because it happened 40 miles from my home and yet it still shook the walls. It woke my husband with a start. He thought for a moment he was back in the army. And my father, asleep in his own home that night, slept through it. Story 34. I was sitting on the couch when I heard heavy footsteps in the attic, like steel-toed boots. I am a small woman, so I panicked, thinking there was a large man stomping around my house. Then the screaming started, real, terrifying screams like something from The Exorcist, and there were multiple voices. I snuck outside in tears, extremely shaken, and called the police. Guess what was in my attic? Not a rapist, but raccoons. They were mating. That was the screaming. I cried to the police about horny raccoons. Story 35. I get auditory hallucinations when I'm tired. They are brought on by my anxiety. One episode triggered the most severe anxiety attack I'd had in months. Just as I was drifting off to sleep, a man yelled "Hey" right into my ear, and I launched myself out of bed before I realized what had happened. Story 36. I had a bad sinus infection once and could not clear it for more than a week. I decided to try a generic cold medicine, Mucinex. I lost 3 days. I came to standing in the middle of my studio apartment, staring at the wall, barely able to remember anything, feeling like a passenger in my own body. I had worked all 3 days, piloted public transit, cooked, translated documents, and used knives, all in a strange fugue state. When I came to, I spent an hour at 3 in the morning trying to figure out what had happened and what caused it. The only thing I had done differently was take the medication for the sinus infection. I poured the rest down the toilet and it never happened again. It was terrifying, the pure and utter confusion. Story 37. I woke up at 4 in the morning because of screaming on the television. They were showing the movie Twilight when Bella was giving birth. It was a truly terrifying experience. Story 38. Sleep paralysis occurs when I wake up from a nightmare soaked in sweat, with a weight on my chest and completely unable to move. Sometimes I see shadowy shapes or feel there is someone watching. Story 39. I had a choking scare when I was about 11. I was home alone watching television and eating Skittles. I used to put a bunch in my mouth and make a Skittle ball that I would chew on. Something on the show made me laugh, and I swallowed the ball. It lodged in my throat. I experienced a few seconds of sheer terror when I realized there was nobody to help me and I might die. Then I remembered a cartoon where someone pressed their stomach against a chair to dislodge something from their throat. I lunged at the corner of the recliner with my stomach as hard as I could. It actually worked and popped the small ball out. I was very lucky because I had no idea what I was doing. It was one of the worst feelings I have ever experienced. I never ate Skittles that way again. Story 40. I was in my room when I suddenly heard a loud thump at the back door. It was so loud I fell off my bed. I did not want to investigate because I like living, but if someone was breaking in, I probably should check. I messaged my friend and asked her to video call me. We got on the call and she muted her microphone so she would not make any noise. I turned the camera so she could see what I was doing in case it was a person and I died. I walked through the house to the back door. It was locked, but the laundry room next to it was slightly ajar. I crept to the laundry room and glanced inside. No one was there. I opened the back door, but there was nothing. On closer inspection, the broom that should have been hanging on the wall was now splayed across the floor. It had simply fallen. It still almost made me shit myself. Story 41. One night I was watching The Conjuring at home with my little sister when we heard someone put a key in the front door and open it. We were sitting in the living room next to a sliding door that was very close to the front door, so we both heard it clearly. This did not alarm us because we knew our dad had gone out to get some things, so we assumed he had returned. "Dad, you're back already?" I asked. There was no response. "Dad?" I asked again, thinking he had not heard me. Again, silence. At that point, I felt that something was not right, and my sister looked very nervous. Up to that point, she had spent the evening rolling her eyes at horror movie cliches, and she rarely gets scared. We looked at each other, wondering what to do. Then we heard more scattering sounds just outside the sliding door. I was frozen with fear. I tried one more time in a louder, shakier voice. "Dad, is that you? Please respond, repeated in my head. But the silence continued. I was freaking out and jumped off the couch. My sister also abruptly got up and started quickly walking toward the kitchen. She later said she planned to grab a knife. She had a horrified look I had not seen before. We stood in nervous silence. I did not know what to do and did not want to make any more noise. I finally walked to the sliding door and opened it as slowly as possible, peering into the darkness. When the door was open wide enough, I poked my head out and scanned the corridor, preparing for the worst. To my surprise, no one was there. Stranger still, the front door was completely shut. We had not heard it close. My sister and I were both extremely relieved, since we had been almost certain there was an intruder. I immediately went to ask my mum, who was in her bedroom at the other end of the house, whether it had been her or if she had noticed anything. She told me that she also thought my dad had come home and that she had heard someone open the front door. About half an hour later, which felt like an eternity because we were still shaken, my dad finally arrived and confirmed that he had not come home earlier. To this day, my sister and I still have no idea what happened that night. Story 42. Nothing quite that terrifying yet. Please let me age well. Once I left all the bathroom windows open wide by mistake when it was very windy. I woke up in the middle of the night to the bathroom door slamming open and shut and felt like I was going to wet myself with fright. I stayed in bed as if I were paralyzed and could feel a cool breeze coming into my room. I prayed to whoever is above to remove whoever or whatever it was from my home and asked for my life to be spared. I got under the covers and called my aunt and asked her to come over, as she had a spare key. She did. She and her husband came with weapons and charged upstairs into the bathroom without fear. They realized it was the wind pushing the door around. I still stayed with her that night. Story 43. I was in high school at the time, around 3 a.m. I had just finished a term paper that was due the next day. I fell asleep on the couch for a few minutes but slowly woke up. As I walked through the dark kitchen, half asleep and looking forward to going to bed, a loud explosion shattered the silence. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard, comparable to a 12-gauge shotgun. Bits of material flew in every direction, with small fragments whizzing past my head. I nearly had a heart attack. It turned out my younger brother had made root beer for an elementary school class project. He had left the bottle on a windowsill, and it fermented until it built up enough pressure to rupture the glass. The flying debris was glass shards. They shattered a ceramic plant pot and embedded themselves in various surfaces. Fortunately, I was unhurt, but for a moment I was completely confused and terrified. Story 44. The neighbor's dog was hit by a car. There was the sudden sound of screeching tires, a bang, a loud yelp, then a man shouting no at the top of his lungs, followed by a chorus of screaming and crying. By the time I reached the window, they were carrying the dog away. It was very sad. Hearing such a guttural scream of grief in the middle of the night was terrifying and still haunts me. I feel sorry for the family and the dog. Story 45. I took in a friend's cat that she did not want because I thought it was being mistreated. It was my first cat. I had recently begun living alone and felt uneasy the first year. One night, I heard a terrifying scream and went from sound asleep to standing beside the bed. I have no memory of moving. I jumped up so quickly. It was my cat yelling at another cat walking across the backyard. It scared me to death. Story 46. I was home for the weekend from university, but my parents and siblings were away, so I was alone. Our house is quite secluded, with a church and graveyard next door and the closest neighbors up the street some distance away. I had all the doors locked and was settling down to watch a movie when the doorbell started to ring. I answered and no one was there. Then the back doorbell rang and again no one was there. This kept happening over and over in the pitch black. Then someone began banging on the windows and shouting. I panicked, so I started calling the police and shouted that I had called them. It turned out to be a couple of students from the university playing a prank on me. I was terrified and reduced to tears, but they thought it was hilarious. They did a few more things like that to me over the 2 to 3 years I was at university with them. I always thought they were my friends. I am older and wiser now and know they were bullies. Story 47. I woke up on the couch after a poor night's sleep. I looked at our counter and thought I saw my brother's decapitated head. I was terrified, but it turned out to be a watermelon. Story 48. My mum once shouted my name when I was home alone. She was in another country. It was midnight, and I lived in a 7-bedroom house. Story 49. When I was 9, I was staying home alone early one morning. I had just gotten out of the shower and brushed my teeth. I put on my favorite outfit, set up a little area in the living room with a drink and a snack, and turned on the television. The phone rang and I went across the house to answer. The voice on the other end was familiar and comforting. He asked about my day and made small talk. After a minute or so he said, "I like your outfit. Is pink your favorite color?" I replied, "Oh, thank you." "No, it isn't." He asked, "What were you planning on watching on television?" It took me a few seconds to understand what was happening. Because I was only 9 and very naive, the voice changed. It became deep, raspy, and horrific. He then proceeded to describe my rape and murder in graphic detail. I went numb. My skin felt as if it were on fire, and my heart was racing. I had never been more terrified in my entire life. I slammed the phone down and called my mother at work. I tried to explain what had happened. She scolded me for answering the phone and told me to go about my day. I remember trying to explain that he was watching me, that he had told me what I had been doing and what I was wearing. I said I was going to call 911 because I needed help. She said, "That isn't necessary. I'm not coming home. Just don't answer the phone and go watch television." I hung up. I was confused and scared. I could feel eyes on me. I pulled the curtains closed and raced around the house, torn between doing what I felt was right and doing what my mother had told me. The phone kept ringing. The second it would stop, it would start again. The sound pulsed through my small body like electricity and nearly paralyzed me. I was frozen and on fire at the same time. I waited for a pause in the ringing and called 911. "I'm home by myself and I'm 9 and someone is watching me and he is going to kill me." The operator tried to keep me calm and said she would send help. I remember standing there, listening to her gentle voice, while every horror movie scenario played out behind me. Was he creeping up with a knife? Was he going to shoot me through a window? Was he going to throw a rock through the glass and open the door? Couldn't breathe. I couldn't feel my body, but I was overly aware of my skin. In a moment of panic, I set off the home alarm and ran outside. I felt a strange relief, but also a separation in my reality. The house felt small, dark, dangerous, and cold. Outside felt open, safe, and warm. I could hear lawnmowers and birds chirping. It was a beautiful break from the bone-chilling feeling of the phone. It was like watching a movie and seeing myself in both environments at once. A neighbor was pushing his child in a swing. He was concerned, let me stand next to him, and protected me. I could hear sirens, growing louder as they came closer. Felt like an eternity, but the police arrived. An officer walked over and asked what had happened. I did my best to explain, but many of the words the voice on the phone used were embarrassing, and I couldn't bring myself to say them to an officer. I can still hear my young voice repeating, "He was watching me. He said he's going to kill me." Not long after, my mother's car pulled into the driveway. For some reason, she had decided to come home. She didn't look for me or speak to me. She calmly got out and walked over to a police officer. I was standing in the doorway from the house to the garage, facing the driveway. I could see my mother and the officer. I watched, trying to understand what was happening, and then I saw her. She was laughing. My face was swollen from tears, my heart still racing, my skin on fire, and my mother was laughing. I slowly crept closer and overheard her say, "I'm so sorry about this." She just got scared being home alone and overreacted. What did I do wrong? Did I imagine this? Was this a dream? Should I not have called 911? Had I overreacted? My memory after that is hazy. I remember refusing to stay home alone and the sound of the phone ringing rippling through my body. I avoided repeating what had been said to me on the phone. My mother decided she knew who did it, even though she did not have details. There was no investigation and no one was questioned. She told me it was a boy my age who lived across the street. I knew that was impossible. No matter how much I protested, I was always told it was him. Many years later, after I was an adult with children, we were at Christmas. Everyone was in the living room and I had gone into a back bedroom to change a diaper. As I walked back into the living room, I could hear my mother laughing, as if she had been telling a joke. The faces in the room showed discomfort, anguish, shock, and fear, but she was still laughing. Felt as if I were moving in slow motion. One of my older children stopped me from entering the living room and gently pushed me back into the room I had just left. "She just told the story of you being home alone and the man threatening to kill you," my child said. "She told it like it was a joke, like a funny story from your childhood. I never learned who it really was. I deal with my fear of ringing phones and phone conversations every day. While staying home alone as a child, someone was watching me and threatening to rape and kill me. My mother, to this day, thinks it is a funny story to tell." Story 50. My ex-boyfriend showed up in front of my apartment and texted that he was there because he wanted to talk. I told him I wasn't home. Thankfully, it was daytime, so I had no lights on, but he called me a liar. He stayed outside for nearly an hour before he gave up and drove off. I stayed in the bathroom the entire time, on the phone with my best friend. Looking back, I should have called the police, but I was a scared 17-year-old. Story 51. One night I was home alone, grilling and chilling. I was drinking beer and smoking dope, a little intoxicated, wearing my home clothes. It was a great evening. As soon as I sat down to eat, I heard a woman yelling for help and pounding on doors. Once I realized she was not a threat to me, I sprinted up the road to find her. She was covered in blood and told me her husband was trapped in the truck he had flipped. She kept trying to get me to help pull him out of the truck, and I said, "Lady, I know this is an emergency, but I am not an emergency medical technician." The worst part was I lived in the woods with no cell service, but I was able to get my landlord's attention so he could call 911 from the landline. I was up until 3 a.m. that night because I could not wind down afterward. Everyone survived and the man got out on his own, but it was the scariest night of my life. Story 52. I woke up to someone pounding on my door at 3 in the morning. My boyfriend was working an overnight shift, so he was not at home. I reached for my phone and it was not where I had left it, so I thought someone had entered my apartment and taken it like in the movie The Strangers. I quickly snapped out of it when the person continued pounding on the door and realized that my phone had fallen off my bed. I grabbed it and called the police to report the disturbance and say I was afraid to open the door. They sent an officer. I did not get out of bed to look through the peephole because I was too frightened. I then called my boyfriend and he said he had accidentally ordered food to our house instead of to his workplace. Story 53. I heard 5 simultaneous creaks from the floorboards in the hallway. It sounded exactly like someone sneaking along. There was no one there. I ran out of the house. Story 54. My dog had a seizure when I was 8 years old. She is still alive and has since been diagnosed with epilepsy. Story 55. I was watching a show where a mother literally became her home and the walls moved to protect her children from the outside world. I felt my house shift, almost in slow motion, like on the show, and I assumed it was a side effect of too much television. Then I screamed when pictures began falling from the mantel. I quickly changed the channel and saw that it was actually an earthquake. Story 56. Hey, here is an opportunity to share one of my weird stories. When I was in college at Georgia Tech, I stayed in a building known as GLC. It was on the far north side of campus, away from most of the dorms, so not many people lived there. I liked it because it was quiet, and it was very easy to rebook the same room due to the lack of demand. When I say it was quiet, I mean we barely heard our neighbors, if we even had any. We really only ever heard other people when they slammed the heavy outer doors. This event happened during Thanksgiving break. I always stayed on campus during Thanksgiving to get work done and relax in peace. My 3 roommates were gone, however, so the quiet GLC was even more silent. I was cleaning my room at the time and I had gotten out a bottle of Febreze. This is important because one of my roommates hated Febreze and would complain even if I sprayed it in my room, because the air conditioning would spread it around the apartment. So I took the opportunity to spray some and get rid of the college boy musk. As soon as I sprayed it, I heard one of my roommate's doors fly open and slam closed and angry heavy footsteps stomp into and around the living room. I thought I had messed up and really pissed off my roommate, but I did find it odd how quickly and aggressively he was reacting. I came into the living room to apologize. I even said something like, "Sorry, man. I didn't know you were here." But as soon as I came into the room, the sound stopped and no one was there. I was so convinced I had heard someone that I even knocked on my roommate's doors. But they were gone. I texted them and confirmed that they were gone, and I was all alone. I never heard the footsteps again, or at least not that loud, and I still do not have an explanation. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.